Hello, I'm Richard Vobes, the Bald Explorer, and today I thought I would give you another story from the remarkable book Tales of Olde Sussex by Philip Mercer, published in 1834. I've done some of these stories before, and they've been very popular, and I thought I would do another one. Philip Mercer, for those of you who are unaware, he wrote this book. He was a curate, and apparently he had travelled around Sussex helping various different vicars and rectors and churches and doing whatever a curate does at these places. And in the process, many of his parishioners had told him stories, yarns, and all sorts of bits and pieces of superstitious nonsense. And over time, he had collected them, and then he published this book. I don't think there's much evidence to say that any of these stories are necessarily true, but who knows? And they've been very popular. Now, because it was so long ago written, rather than just read the story in the old language, I sort of made some notes and regurgitated in hopefully more modern language, and so that's what I'm aiming to do here. So this is the story of the Shilling Scarecrow. And it takes place down in East Sussex near Pevensey, and it concerns a shoemaker or cobbler, Jake Meeks. He was a cobbler in London. So the story goes, and he got into a bit of a bad way. He was relatively successful for a while, but he lost his wife. He was a gambler. He dabbled in ladies of the night, shall we say, to put it politely, and he got himself into huge amounts of debt. Now, to avoid going to debtor's prison, I should say that this is set, I think, around 1783, something like that, certainly in the late 18th century, and in order to avoid going to debtor's prison, he fled London and made his way into the countryside. And in order to survive and to feed himself, he did odd jobs for people. A lot of digging vegetables, manual labour, that sort of thing, taking animals to and from market and bits and bobs like that. Where he could get jobs, mending boots, fixing saddles, those sort of things, he excelled at. He often tried to get money for this, but if he couldn't get money, he would just get a bed for the night somewhere or a hot meal. And that seemed to do him as he travelled around very much as a vagabond, always being under suspicion from villagers and townsfolk. And it seems that he avoided larger towns, keeping to the smaller villages and places like that, so that he wouldn't become recognised if anything was reported in the newspapers that were beginning to circulate then. Anyway, he came down to a place called Rickney, I think it is, near Pevensey, which is a small village. And there's a town I also think called Hankham nearby. And it was in that sort of district that he was operating as far as this story is concerned, staying at an inn called the Half Moon. So called, I believe, because around that area was a lot of smuggling back in the mid-18th century. And under half moon or darker was when the mysterious smugglers would go about their business. Anyway, he was in the half moon one evening, and he was listening to the rumour, or the legend I should say, of the Shilling Scarecrow. Off Rickney Bridge, apparently, there's a river that goes up there. Mercer doesn't tell us what the name of the river or stream is, but adjacent to that there are these cornfields, and in the cornfield, quite noticeable from the lane that goes over this bridge, or goes to the bridge that goes over the stream, was a scarecrow that had been there for a long time, pretty much unchanged. And the legend was that if you placed your last shilling, or one of your last shillings, which was a lot of money back then, in the right boot of the Scarecrow, that not only would good luck follow, but certainly wealth and beauty would enter into your life. Well, Jake was told this and thought it was absolute rubbish, because he was very sceptical of these things, as indeed I would be. But a number of the villagers would say, oh no, but this is true, it has happened. There are 3 people within living memory who such outrageously good fortune has happened to, that, you know, it is a thing. But of course it's a lot of money, and not many people wanted to risk a shilling and leave a shilling in the boot of a Scarecrow. So Jake was determined to find out who these people were who had had this good luck, and try and work out for himself whether this was a sensible thing to do. But the villagers would clamp up at this. They didn't want to reveal who these people were. However, Jake was a determined man, and as he worked in the area, he would ask about the Scarecrow to see if he could find out who they were. And he was working for an old soldier, a retired soldier, one time. And this soldier said, yes, actually, there was a cook who had worked in one of the larger houses for a long time. She had been fired for a misdemeanor, which wasn't clear what that was, and she was on hard times. The worry of it all, she had lost most of her hair, and people had mocked her for being bald, and I know what that's like. So she, in desperation, knew about this rumour, had placed a shilling in the boot, the right boot of this Scarecrow, in the dead of night. Had to be at night. And very swiftly afterwards, good luck had befallen her. Her hair had started to grow very luxuriously, but better than that, she was employed suddenly by the local squire, and became the head cook of a large house, and was entertaining, or was paid to handsomely to entertain, as the squire entertained, to cook the food for this entertainment for many of the important people in the area. And the food was so luscious and so good that she had been picked, and she had then left the village to go to somewhere new. And it was a story that many people knew about. And Jake thought that this is interesting. He later was working for a pig farmer, helping a pig farmer build a new pig pen for a number of the pigs there. And again, he was asking about the shilling Scarecrow, if this was true or just a load of old rubbish. And the pig farmer said, yes, it was true, that there was indeed a priest who had fallen on bad times and lost his faith. And this priest, in desperation, had placed a coin, a shilling, in the right boot in the dead of night. And miraculously, very soon after, a commission came to the priest that he would then, he could not turn down, to become a missionary, to go to Africa to bring Christianity to the natives. And the priest thought this was a wonderful thing to do, and along with a number of women who would go with him, beautiful women, they set off to do such missionary work. And that was incredible. And so Jake thought this was wonderful, but he still wasn't 100% convinced. It was a lot of money. However, Jake was working yet again for somebody else, the night soil man. The night soil man is the man that goes and takes the the toiletries, shall we say, that people have stashed up in towns and villages. And the night soil man would have this cart full of all the effluent, really, because drains and things were not really a thing back then. And he would bring this cart, and the night soil would be, well, was used as a sort of fertilizer, basically, and it would be dug into fields and things like that. And so Jake had procured, I suppose, or was helping this night soil man get rid of some of this night soil. Jake asked the night soil man if he knew anything of the legend of the Shilling Scarecrow and any of the people who had been affected. And the night soil man said, yes, of course. There was the sailor, a sailor who had retired and was living out his time quite happily, but on a meagre wage, when a ship came to anchor not far from Peacehaven, probably over in Eastbourne, I imagine, and he secured a job to watch over the ship because the ship's sails were in a terrible state and needed to be repaired before the ship could go on and complete its journey. And a number of people, 2 or 3 ex-sailors, had been contacted to see if they would look after the ship so that the ship's crew could all come ashore, which is what happened. And while he was watching the ship as the sails were being repaired, the sails, I believe, had been brought inland, weren't being repaired on the ship. They'd been brought inland to be resewn and patched up, or whatever you do with sails. And on the ship, it seems that not only was he paid quite handsomely for this simple task, but he met a beautiful woman and fell in love, and the woman amazingly fell in love with him. And after this arduous task was over of watching the ship a week or so for these sails to be repaired, because there was already a lot of sails all over the place, he had developed this relationship with this woman, and together they went off, I believe, to London, a major city, I think Mercer says, but most likely to be London, to live out their days. So Jake now had become pretty convinced that there was something in this, leaving a shilling in the boot of the Scarecrow in the dead of night. However, he was not prepared to leave any of his money in this Scarecrow in case it was all baloney. And he came up with a plan, for he had learned that because of the smuggling along the coastline, that a platoon of dragoons were to be stationed along in different points along the coast, and one was quite near to Pevensey. And he had this idea. So he borrowed a frock coat and a silver-tipped walking stick from an acquaintance who owed him a favour. And one night he strode up to the camp where the dragoons were and began to sing bawdy songs, staggering away, yelling obscenities and coarse jokes. And the dragoons, who saw this strange figure, questioned him. "Who are you? What do you want? What are you doing here?" And he spouted some rubbish about being the happiest man in the world, the luckiest man. "I am the luckiest man," he said. And these dragoons were sort of a bit amused by this character and said, "Come and sit down and have a drink with us and tell us your good fortune." So Jake continued in this drunken fashion to tell these dragoons about his great fortune, that he had been a down and out cobbler, that he had lost his way, but suddenly from nowhere, magically almost, that he had had a commission to make shoes for the king, but not only the king, but all the members of court and the lords and ladies in London, that he was going to make an absolute fortune from it all thanks to him placing his last shilling in the boot of a scarecrow. And the dragoons were curious to find out about this so-called boot of the Scarecrow, and he pointed towards Rickney Bridge and the Scarecrow, and they knew the Scarecrow. They'd seen it as they came in. They said, "Oh yes." And he said, "It is true. The rumours that the myth of this Scarecrow is so true. I had nothing, and here am I going to make these shoes for the king. I am a cobbler, and I am to be one of the richest men in the nation, I'm sure." The dragoons laughed at him and slapped him on the back and sent him on his way and told him to sober up and behave and all of this. And so Jake returned back to wherever he was staying, returned the frock coat and the silver-tipped walking cane, and he made his way off to where the field and the Scarecrow is. For he knew that these dragoons were ill-paid, were disgruntled and had bad conditions, that each and every one of them would like some luck to befall them. And so he went to the Scarecrow, pulled off the clothes the Scarecrow was wearing, took out the stuffing and scattered it, and dressed himself up as the Scarecrow. And there he waited for several nights, for at least 2 weeks, dressed up as the Scarecrow on the darkest of nights in particular, and would wait to see what would happen. And sure enough, in the small hours of the night, there would be scamperings. Certain figures would suddenly emerge on their own, nervously, and place a silver coin in the right boot of the Scarecrow. Now, Jake had been very clever because he was a cobbler of some skill. He had fashioned his boots in such a way as to hide the fact on the right leg that his leg was in it, and so there was ample space to place a coin and not be detected. And this went on for these 2 weeks, in which not necessarily every night, but some nights 2 visitors would come and coins would come in. And at the end of these 2 weeks, on one sunny morning, he was sitting there counting the shillings that had been placed into the boot, and it amounted to 21 shillings. 21 shillings. That was quite a hoard, quite a nice lump of money for Jake Meeks. And he realised that he couldn't keep this up for any longer because people would soon become suspicious. And so he thought he would take this money, which he had been burying nearby to hide it so nobody would find it in a hole and with a stone hiding it that only he knew where it was. He would collect the rest of the money and he would flee that very day and go and work another scam somewhere else and make more money. And that was his plan, and he was going to leave when suddenly along the road came a troop of dragoons, possibly the same dragoons that he'd seen before, but certainly quite a few of them. And they were coming along, and he quickly got back up onto his stick and made out that he was the Scarecrow. They were some distance off, but he didn't want them to think the Scarecrow had made a run for it or anything like that. And that the platoon of dragoons made their way to Rickney Bridge, from which you could observe the Scarecrow quite easily. And they were standing at the bridge, lounging about, smoking and taking it easy, for they decided they clearly needed a break. And at that moment, a beautiful woman from a nearby village came along with golden hair and baskets and things. And the dragoons flocked around her, trying to impress her and talking to her, flirting, I suppose. And Jake was fascinated and could hear some of this conversation whistling across on the wind. And it seemed that these dragoons were complaining to this woman of how ill-equipped they were to deal with the smugglers, that the smugglers were coming in and they were unseen. None of the villagers would help them and reveal who they were, that the secrets were being kept. And they were also moaning that their guns, the rifles or the muskets, whatever the guns they were using at that period of time, were not very accurate and no good. And they were moaning and saying this because some of them were claiming that they were better shots than the other, and said, oh, I'm a first-class shot, and look at this equipment we have, it is rubbish and no good. And the woman said, as each one boasted how marvellous they were, and there were argument about who was the best shot came out, the woman said, well, surely it is easy to find out which of you is the best shot. For if you can shoot the Scarecrow across there, the one that can shoot him more accurately, or take off his head or anything like that, will be the one who is the best shot. And the dragoons laughed and thought this a brilliant idea. And so they loaded their rifles and they let the bullets fly. Well, it's interesting to note, says Philip Mercer in his book, that thereafter the crows were not so much interested in the corn on the fields anymore, but were very fascinated and bosom pals with the Scarecrow himself. So much so that if you were an observer resting at the bridge, you might think that these crows were actually pecking at the Scarecrow himself, pulling out his eyes, possibly eating the flesh, maybe, if it wasn't for the fact that a Scarecrow was just stuffed with straw. And I don't know, and it never says in the book, whether the money was ever found, the 21 shillings was ever discovered. But the legend is it that if you stand on Rickney Bridge and fire a shot from a rifle into the night, a macabre howl of pain will return to you. Anyway, that's my story from Philip Mercer. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to leave me a comment or a thumbs up. Subscribe, become a patron, and in due course I'll make you another one of these Philip Mercer stories and tell you what happened in Olde Sussex. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.